Go ahead, little genius, translate that. If you can, I'll give your mother my job." The words hit the air like a slap. For a second, even the projector's soft hum seemed to freeze. Then came the laughter, loud, sharp, and cruel. Richard Hawthorne, the Millionaire CEO known for his arrogance, leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed neatly over the other, smirking as if he'd just told the world's funniest joke. The polished mahogany table reflected his confidence like a mirror of power. Across from him stood Naomi Carter, a 16-year-old black girl with a shy posture but eyes that carried quiet intelligence. She clutched her small notebook to her chest, the same one where she practiced Japanese phrases at night after school. Behind her, near the door, her mother, Lydia Carter, stood frozen, a cleaning rag still in her trembling hand. The laughter stabbed deeper than any insult. She had worked this job for years to give her daughter a chance at something better. Richard turned toward his board members, grinning. "Didn't you say your daughter was smart? Let's see if she even knows what konnichiwa means." The executives chuckled obediently. Cameras flashed as if capturing her humiliation was part of the entertainment. Naomi took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the notebook. The words that had lived in her mind for years, the ones her late father had taught her before he passed, rose like a tide. She stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Would you like me to translate your last sentence?" She paused, eyes locking on Richard's. "Or the one you said before, when you insulted the Japanese investors for being too polite to notice your lies?" A hush fell over the room. Chairs creaked. One investor, seated near the head of the table, lifted his brow, stunned. Another leaned forward, whispering in Japanese to a colleague. Richard's smile faltered, the confidence draining from his face as quickly as the laughter had from the room. Naomi didn't flinch. She stood taller now, her voice carrying a calm authority far beyond her years. Her mother's rag dropped from her hand to the floor. For the first time, every pair of eyes in that room was on the girl they had dismissed as the janitor's kid. The silence felt heavy, alive, like the air before a storm. They thought they were laughing at a janitor's daughter. But in 5 minutes, the girl they mocked would make every man in that room bow. Naomi Carter's world was small but full of dreams. She lived with her mother, Lydia, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that smelled of detergent and warm fabric. The ceiling leaked during heavy rain, and the single fan in their living room groaned with every turn. But to Naomi, it was home, a place where love stretched farther than money ever could. Every night, Lydia would come home from her cleaning job at Hawthorne Enterprises long after midnight, her uniform soaked in sweat and her hands smelling of bleach. Still, she'd sit on the edge of Naomi's bed, smiling through exhaustion. "People may overlook your worth, baby," she'd whisper, brushing Naomi's curls from her forehead, "but language can open any locked door." Those words stuck like glue in Naomi's heart. While other kids watched TV, Naomi buried herself in online lessons, learning Japanese from videos and chat rooms. She was fascinated by the way language could bridge two worlds, how the same word could sound soft or sharp depending on who said it. Her notebooks were full of handwritten kanji, each one practiced dozens of times until the strokes felt like second nature. Her passion started years earlier, when her father, a U.S. Marine stationed in Okinawa, would video call from across the world. He'd smile proudly whenever Naomi mimicked Japanese greetings. "Konnichiwa," she'd say, beaming, and he'd laugh. But after his sudden death in service, those words became her way of holding on to him. Every arigato she spoke carried his memory. Now, Naomi's biggest dream was to win a scholarship as an interpreter, not for fame, but so her mother could finally stop scrubbing floors for people who didn't even look her in the eye. Lydia, for her part, never let bitterness take root. She had seen the worst sides of wealth, entitled executives who treated janitors as invisible. Yet she believed in quiet dignity. When she was assigned to clean Richard Hawthorne's building, she kept her head down and did her work with precision. "Respect yourself, even when they don't," she'd tell Naomi. "The right people will notice." Richard Hawthorne was the kind of man who measured worth in money and power. Once a struggling salesman, he had clawed his way into wealth, but success hadn't softened him. It had sharpened his arrogance. He dressed like a magazine cover and spoke like he owned the world. In meetings, he cut people off mid-sentence, using charm as a weapon. His staff feared him. He called it respect. His empire, Hawthorne Enterprises, prided itself on international partnerships, though Richard himself had no real respect for culture. For him, deals were trophies, and people were tools. When he learned that Japanese investors were flying in for a merger, he didn't bother studying their customs. "They're polite to a fault," he bragged to his board. "As long as I look confident, they'll eat it up." That arrogance would soon become his downfall. On the day before the big meeting, Lydia arrived early to clean the conference room. Naomi, on spring break, tagged along to help her mother dust the chairs and wipe the glass walls. The long mahogany table gleamed under the lights. Naomi paused when she saw the digital presentation on the screen, full of Japanese text. She frowned. Some phrases didn't make sense. "Mom," she whispered, "this translation is wrong. It says cheap partnership instead of mutual growth." Lydia laughed softly. "Maybe it's just business talk, sweetheart." Naomi shook her head. "No, Mom, words matter." Lydia's smile faded. She could hear footsteps in the hallway, Richard's voice booming as he barked orders to his assistant. "Make sure everything's perfect. I don't want to see a single speck of dust or delay." Lydia quickly tucked her cleaning cloth into her pocket and whispered to Naomi, "Just listen quietly, baby. Understanding people before they speak. That's real power." From the doorway, Naomi watched Richard strut into the room, rehearsing his speech out loud. His confidence was theatrical, every gesture practiced. When one of his employees nervously corrected a slide, Richard sneered, "Don't question me. They won't notice the difference anyway." Naomi's heart clenched. He was referring to the Japanese investors, to her father's language, as something disposable. She wanted to speak up, but her mother's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Let it go," Lydia whispered. "Not every truth needs to be spoken at once." But deep down, Naomi knew. Some truths couldn't stay silent forever. That night she went home and studied harder than ever. The next day would bring the meeting that changed their lives. And when Richard Hawthorne tried to mock her, Naomi would prove that the quietest voice in the room could be the one that carried the most power. The next afternoon, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Hawthorne Enterprises, catching the reflections of sharp suits and polished shoes. Naomi had come by to bring her mother lunch, 2 homemade sandwiches and a thermos of tea, something simple to make her long shift a little easier. But when she arrived, the building felt different. The lobby buzzed with tension. Foreign voices echoed down the hall. Her mother met her at the elevator, whispering quickly, "They're here, the Japanese investors. It's the biggest deal of Richard Hawthorne's career. Just sit quietly in the corner until I'm done, okay?" Naomi nodded and followed her upstairs. From the doorway of the massive boardroom, she could see everything. The enormous mahogany table, the investors seated in perfect posture, and Richard striding back and forth like a king preparing for battle. His translator, a nervous young man with glasses, sat beside him, flipping frantically through his notes. As the meeting began, Richard's voice filled the room. "Gentlemen," he said, spreading his arms wide, "we're honored to have you here. Together, we'll redefine global innovation." The translator hesitated before speaking in Japanese, fumbling over words. Naomi winced. The phrase he used meant something closer to, "We will control global innovation." The investors shifted uncomfortably. Glancing at one another, Naomi could see the disconnect. Each sentence from Richard growing more self-congratulatory, each translation further from the truth. Idioms were lost, tone mismatched, and jokes turned awkward. When Richard made a sarcastic remark about being late, the translator mistranslated it as being lazy. One investor's polite smile faded instantly. Lydia noticed, too. Her hand trembled as she wiped the already spotless glass wall. "This isn't going well," she whispered to Naomi. Richard, oblivious to the growing discomfort, grinned broadly. "See? They love it," he whispered to his assistant. But they didn't. They exchanged uneasy glances, their faces giving away polite restraint. The atmosphere was sliding from cordial to strained. Then came the breaking point. When one of the investors asked a question about community partnerships, the translator froze completely, mishearing the word shakai, society, for shakai teki, social events. He responded with something absurd about parties and public relations. The investors exchanged shocked looks. A long silence followed. Richard's smile faltered. His eyes darted across the room until they landed on Naomi, standing quietly near the door holding her mother's lunch bag. "Hey, Lydia," he barked, seizing the chance to deflect attention. "Your kid looks smart. Want to try translating? I could use a laugh." The room tittered. A few executives chuckled nervously, eager to echo his tone. Lydia froze, horrified. "Mr. Hawthorne, please, she's just—" "Come on," Richard pressed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe she can do better than this useless interpreter." He gestured toward the sweating translator who looked ready to vanish. Naomi's heart pounded. Heat rose in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, but she also knew she couldn't let her mother be humiliated. She looked up, locking eyes with Richard, her expression calm even as her fingers tightened around the paper bag. I don't think that's a good idea," she said softly. Richard smirked. "What, scared? Didn't your mom say you were a genius or something?" The laughter grew louder this time. One of the executives even pulled out his phone, as if this were entertainment. Lydia stepped forward, voice shaking. "Please, sir, let's not—" "Relax, Lydia," Richard interrupted. "We're just having a little fun." The air in the room thickened with discomfort. Even the Japanese investors looked uneasy now, glancing at one another, sensing the cruelty disguised as humor. Then, softly, one of the investors spoke in Japanese, his tone calm but cutting. "Does he always treat workers like this?" Naomi froze. The words echoed in her mind. Clear, precise, familiar. She'd spent years practicing this language in private. Without thinking, she answered, also in Japanese. Her pronunciation was fluid, natural, and perfect. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, "but he doesn't realize you understand every word." The investor blinked. Then a slow smile spread across his face. The room went still. Richard looked confused, not understanding the exchange. The translator turned pale, realizing what had just happened. Naomi quickly lowered her eyes, realizing she had spoken out loud, but the investors leaned forward now, whispering among themselves. Their tone had shifted, not condescending, but curious. One murmured to another in Japanese, "She might save this deal or destroy him." Lydia grabbed her daughter's hand tightly, whispering, "Naomi, what did you just say?" But Naomi didn't answer. For the first time, she wasn't scared. She looked across the table where the investors now sat upright, watching her with genuine interest. She had accidentally shown them the truth, and they liked it. Richard, oblivious to the exchange, straightened his tie and forced a grin. "So, what's everyone staring at?" No one replied. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Somewhere deep inside Naomi's chest, fear turned into quiet resolve. She didn't plan to embarrass anyone, but she wouldn't let them humiliate her mother again either. The meeting wasn't over. Not yet, but the balance of power in that room had just started to tilt. Richard's patience snapped like glass. He slammed his palm on the table, startling everyone. "Fine," he barked, glaring at Naomi. "If you're so smart, you translate. Let's see if that big mouth of yours can keep up. You've got 5 minutes. If you mess up once, your mom's fired." The words hit harder than a slap. Lydia gasped, her face draining of color. "Please, sir, she's just a child." "Then she'll fail quickly," Richard interrupted, his grin returning. "And we can get back to real business." Naomi's chest tightened. She looked at her mother, the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion, who believed respect could survive even among the cruel. Then she straightened her back, her trembling hands stilling around her notebook. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll translate." A hush fell across the room. The investors leaned forward, intrigued. Lydia's lips trembled as she whispered, "Naomi, you don't have to." Naomi looked back, her voice calm but certain. "You once told me, Mom, language opens every locked door. Let's see if that's true." Richard smirked and gestured to the investors. "Let's begin, shall we?" The lead investor resumed speaking in Japanese. The words flowed fast. Idioms, layered phrases, polite metaphors. The translator had barely been able to keep up before, but Naomi followed effortlessly. She not only translated word for word, but carried tone, formality, warmth, nuance, perfectly. Her voice was steady, clear, rhythmic, She didn't just translate. She communicated. When one investor used a joke, a play on the proverb, "Even monkeys fall from trees," Naomi smiled faintly and rendered it naturally in English. "Even the best of us make mistakes." The investors chuckled. Richard frowned. "Wait, what's so funny?" The investor replied through Naomi. "We appreciate how fluent your assistant is." For the first time, laughter wasn't aimed at Naomi. It was at him. As the conversation continued, Naomi didn't falter once. When Richard attempted to show off by quoting a Japanese slogan he had Googled earlier, "Ishokanmei ni hatarakimasu," he mispronounced it so badly that the investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Naomi stepped in gracefully. "Mr. Hawthorne meant to say, 'We work with all our heart,'" she corrected in flawless Japanese, then added softly, "He's still learning pronunciation." The room erupted with restrained smiles. Lydia's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide in disbelief. By the third minute, it was clear who controlled the room. The investors directed all questions to Naomi now, not to Richard. Their posture relaxed, their tone respectful. Even the lead investor, known for his sternness, nodded approvingly after each translation. Richard, sweating under his suit, loosened his tie. "All right, that's enough. Let's—" But the lead investor interrupted, in English. "Actually, there is one more document we'd like explained. If your young interpreter could assist?" Naomi froze for a moment, unsure if she should continue. Richard waved dismissively, forcing a laugh. "Sure, go ahead, kid. Let's entertain our guests." The investor handed her a printed contract. Naomi read through it quickly, her heart pounding as her eyes scanned line after line. Something didn't add up. The Japanese version differed from the English one. Subtle, but crucial. The section detailing profit distribution had been altered. In English, it gave Richard a 15% personal consulting fee. In Japanese, it didn't exist at all. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked up, first at Richard, then at the investors. "There's an error," she said carefully in Japanese. "The English version includes a clause that doesn't appear in your copy." The room went still. Richard's chair creaked as he shifted uncomfortably. "You must be mistaken," he said quickly. Naomi's eyes didn't leave the paper. "It says, an additional 15% commission to be wired to the personal account of Richard Hawthorne." Gasps rippled across the table. One of the investors stood. "Is this true?" he demanded. Richard stammered. That's just a draft. Some confusion in legal." But Naomi continued, reading aloud, first in Japanese, then in English, every incriminating word. Her tone never wavered. Her composure sliced sharper than anger ever could. When she finished, silence ruled the room. The lead investor turned to Richard, expression cold as steel. "We value honesty. This meeting is over." Richard's face turned a mottled red. "Wait, you don't understand. This girl she's manipulating." But his assistant, pale and trembling, stepped forward and handed him an envelope. "Sir," she whispered, "corporate headquarters just called." Richard tore it open and froze. Inside was a single letter, termination of contract, effective immediately. He stared at the paper as if it were on fire. "This can't—" The lead investor nodded to Naomi. "We prefer to finalize negotiations with your assistance, Miss Carter. Your honesty and skill have saved this partnership." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was dignified, genuine, the kind that carries respect. Lydia's knees buckled. She had to grip the chair for balance. Naomi turned to Richard, her face calm, her eyes unwavering. "You said you'd give my mother your job if I translated," she said softly. "So, when should she start?" The words hung in the air like lightning. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. His mouth opened, then closed again, his ego collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. The investors rose, bowing slightly to Naomi as they exited. Reporters outside caught glimpses through the glass wall. Flashes began to go off. Inside the boardroom, Lydia rushed forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. She cupped Naomi's face in her hands, her voice breaking. "Baby, you did it. You did it." Naomi smiled weakly. "You said words could open locked doors, Mama." She glanced toward the stunned CEO slumped in his chair. Looks like one just closed behind him. The sound of applause swelled from the hallway. The staff, the assistants, even the security guard by the elevator clapped as Naomi and Lydia stepped out together. And as the doors closed behind them, Richard Hawthorne's empire, built on ego and deceit, began to crumble. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the video from the boardroom had spread like wildfire across social media. The clip opened with Richard Hawthorne's booming voice, "Go ahead, little genius, translate that," followed by laughter. Then it showed Naomi stepping forward, small and calm, translating flawlessly in front of the shocked executives. When she corrected his slogan and read the real contract aloud, the internet erupted. Within 24 hours, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Headlines blazed across screens. Teen janitor's daughter outsmarts millionaire CEO in Japanese negotiation. Black teen's translation exposes corporate deceit in viral clip. Respect has no accent. Naomi Carter becomes a symbol of integrity. The comments were endless. Praise, disbelief, inspiration. People wrote about how her courage reminded them of their own silent struggles. Teachers replayed the video in classrooms. Parents shared it with their children. 1,000 hashtags bloomed overnight. Naomi speaks, language of respect, as daughter of dignity. Meanwhile, at the Carter apartment above the laundromat, Lydia sat on the worn couch with her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming as she watched her daughter on national television. Naomi, sitting beside her, blushed every time her face appeared on screen. A reporter's voice said, "Naomi Carter, 16, the daughter of a janitor," stunned corporate leaders when she revealed fraudulent documents during a live translation in front of international investors. Lydia turned to her daughter, voice trembling with pride. "You didn't just speak Japanese, baby," she whispered. "You spoke the language of respect." Naomi smiled shyly, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. "I just told the truth, Mama. That's all." Lydia shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. You reminded the world that truth still has a voice, even if it comes from the quietest person in the room." Later that week, an envelope arrived in the mail with an embossed seal from Tokyo. Inside was a letter from the Japanese investors themselves, written in both English and Japanese. It read, "Dear Miss Carter, your integrity, intelligence, and grace have inspired us deeply. It would be our honor to fund your education in Japan at Tokyo University's Language and Diplomacy program. You embody the spirit of bridge building between cultures. Respectfully, Chairman Sato and the board of Yamato Global Holdings." Naomi read the letter twice, her eyes widening. Her mother gasped, handing over her heart. "A full scholarship? Naomi, this is everything you dreamed of." But the recognition didn't end there. A week later, a nonprofit organization called Voices Without Borders reached out. They had chosen Naomi as their Youth Global Voice of the Year, honoring her for restoring dignity to the powerless through the art of language. At the ceremony, Naomi stood in front of hundreds of people, cameras flashing, her voice soft but confident as she said, "I just wanted them to listen, not to me, but to what's right." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Meanwhile, Richard Hawthorne's empire crumbled under scrutiny. Internal audits exposed years of misconduct, misreported funds, falsified documents, discriminatory practices. Under public pressure, he resigned from Hawthorne Enterprises. His resignation statement was full of hollow words about reflection and growth. But the company, desperate to repair its image, released a stronger one. "We recognize that integrity must come before hierarchy." Hawthorne Enterprises is instituting a new workplace equality and ethics program in honor of Naomi and Lydia Carter. In the following weeks, media outlets continued to revisit Naomi's story. Talk shows invited her to speak about courage. Universities asked her to mentor students, but she stayed humble, declining most offers to focus on her studies. She told one reporter, "The spotlight isn't the goal. It's what you do with it that matters." Back home, Lydia framed the viral headline and hung it above the kitchen table. Every morning, she'd glance at it before work, smiling to herself. Naomi would joke, "Mom, you're going to wear that paper out." Lydia would laugh softly. Not before it reminds me that faith in good people never goes to waste. On a quiet Sunday morning, Naomi sat by the window, her notebook open. The air smelled of coffee and sunlight. She turned to a clean page, writing slowly in neat handwriting. Respect needs no translation. She underlined it twice, then smiled, because she knew that those 5 words would carry her farther than any spotlight or headline ever could. Outside, life went on, but for Naomi Carter and her mother, everything had changed. They had proven that the worth of a person isn't written in their paycheck, but in their principles. And the girl, once mocked in a boardroom, now stood as a reminder to the world. Sometimes the smallest voice can echo loud enough to change everything. Years passed, and the name Naomi Carter became more than just a viral headline. It became a symbol of quiet revolution. The girl, once mocked in a glass-walled boardroom, grew into a woman whose voice crossed borders and built bridges where walls once stood. After completing her degree in Japan, Naomi returned to the U.S. fluent in 5 languages: English, Japanese, Spanish, French, and Korean. But she didn't chase fame or wealth. She chased purpose. She founded a nonprofit called Bridging Words. Its mission was simple but powerful: to teach underprivileged youth foreign languages for free, giving them the same key her mother once handed her, the power to unlock doors that society had sealed shut. Her classes were held in community centers, schools, and even online. Children from every background, immigrant, poor, marginalized, sat in circles with notebooks open and curiosity blazing. Naomi told them, "You don't need to be rich to speak the language of the world. You just need to care enough to learn it." Under her leadership, Bridging Words grew rapidly. Partnerships with schools, embassies, and global organizations turned her small dream into a worldwide initiative. By her mid-20s, Naomi had trained over 10,000 students, not just in grammar, but in empathy. She often said, translation isn't about words. It's about understanding hearts. Meanwhile, Lydia Carter found her own transformation. With funding assistance from the Japanese investors, she opened Carter Cleaning Services, a small business that employed single mothers struggling to provide for their children. She replaced janitorial uniforms with branded navy polos that read, "Pride in every shine." When reporters asked why she chose that name, Lydia smiled softly and replied, "Because dignity doesn't depend on who signs your paycheck. It depends on how you do your work." Her company flourished. Within 2 years, Carter Cleaning expanded to 3 cities. Lydia trained her staff not just in cleaning, but in confidence. She encouraged them to speak to clients with pride, reminding them that no job was small when done with respect. One afternoon, the Japanese investors who had once witnessed Naomi's brilliance returned to visit. They walked into Lydia's modest office with smiles and deep bows. The eldest among them, Chairman Sato, spoke through an interpreter. Though he didn't need one anymore, Naomi stood beside him, translating perfectly. He said warmly, "President Carter, thank you for raising your brilliance." Lydia's eyes welled with tears as Naomi squeezed her hand. "She raised courage," Naomi translated, smiling. The brilliance was already there. That night, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Naomi and Lydia sat on the porch of their small but beautiful home, no longer above a laundromat, but with a view of the world they had built. Lydia looked up at the stars and said softly, "Your father would have been so proud." Naomi smiled. "I hope so, Mama. I just did what you taught me, to listen before speaking." Far away, Richard Hawthorne's story had taken a different turn. Stripped of power and reputation, he eventually resurfaced as a corporate ethics lecturer, standing in classrooms teaching executives about humility and integrity. His old arrogance had faded. His voice carried the heaviness of regret. No one cheered his name and no one remembered the empire he'd once ruled. He was a footnote in Naomi's story, a reminder that humiliation fades faster than redemption, and some lessons arrive only through loss. Years later, Naomi found herself standing behind a clear podium at the United Nations Youth Conference in Geneva. She was 28, now a professional interpreter for world leaders. Behind her, the giant projector screen displayed a photo, a younger Naomi standing beside Lydia in the old boardroom, both smiling through tears. The caption read, Dignity has no accent. As Naomi translated speeches from delegates across the globe, her calm voice filled the hall, carrying the weight of every dream that had once seemed impossible. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't prepare notes. She simply looked into the sea of faces and said, "My story began with mockery, but it ended with meaning. Words can wound, but they can also heal. The day I learned to translate, I didn't just learn another language. I learned that understanding is the first step toward peace." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause, and somewhere in that moment, between the applause, the flags, and the echoes of her mother's voice, Naomi Carter realized that she hadn't just opened doors. She had built new ones, wide enough for others to walk through. They mocked a janitor's daughter for daring to speak, but her words carried more power than their money ever could. In one unforgettable moment, laughter turned to silence, and silence turned to respect. What began as an insult became a revolution of dignity. Naomi Carter didn't shout or fight for recognition. She simply let truth translate for itself. The boardroom that once echoed with arrogance became the birthplace of a new kind of power, one that didn't depend on titles or wealth, but on courage, intelligence, and grace. Lydia's hands once scrubbed those same floors. Now her daughter stood in the world's highest rooms, proving that brilliance doesn't need permission to shine, because intelligence has no price tag. Language, compassion, and dignity are the true tools of power, the kind that can't be stolen, silenced, or ignored. If this story reminded you that brilliance can come from anywhere, like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere right now, another quiet voice is waiting to be heard, and the next word they speak might just change everything.